Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Dr. Olayemi Cardoso, and the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, were among top government officials that attended the annual meetings of the Boards of Governors of the World Bank Group WBG and the International Monetary Fund IMF in Marrakesh, Morocco last week. The IMF says global economy continues to recover from the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, showing remarkable resilience, but at a very slow and uneven pace. Meanwhile, there are tentative signs that the outlook in many African countries is improving and growth is set to strengthen from 3.2% this year to 3.8% next year. In today's package, we have more on the latest IMF World Economic Outlook and the Africa Special Issue from the annual meetings which ended on Saturday, October the 15th. We also have the concluding part of an economist's view of pressing macroeconomic issues and the financial system in the country. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. The annual meetings of the Boards of Governors of the World Bank Group and the International Monetary Fund brought together finance ministers and central bank governors from 190 countries in Marrakesh, Morocco. The week-long event, which ended on Saturday, 15th October, provided opportunities for bilateral and multilateral talks among participating countries. Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Dr. Olayemi Cardoso, and the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, led the Nigerian delegation at a meeting with the IMF Managing Director, Mrs. Kristalina Georgieva. On the sidelines of the IMF annual meetings, Dr. Cardoso and the CBN Deputy Governor Economic Policy, Mr. Mohammed Sani Abdullahi, also met with their counterparts from the Central Bank of the Gambia, Mr. Boa Saidi and Mr. Abdulaziz Sire Jallo last Friday. The two central banks discussed areas of collaboration within the West African region. International Monetary Fund IMF Chief Economist Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas told journalists at the IMF World Economic Outlook press briefing in Marrakesh, Morocco last week that most countries are not expected to return to inflation targets until 2025, while commodity prices could become more volatile with increasing climate and geopolitical shocks. The IMF observed the appearance of divergences. Baseline forecasts project a more pronounced slowdown in advanced economies than in emerging markets and developing economies.
Among advanced economies, the US has been revised up with resilient consumption and investment, while the euro area has been revised down as tighter monetary policy and the energy crisis took a toll. There is divergence also among emerging markets and developing economies, with China facing growing headwinds, while Brazil, India, and Russia are revised up. The news on inflation is encouraging, but we're not quite there yet. Headline inflation continues to decelerate. Core inflation, excluding food and energy prices, is also projected to decline, but more gradually. However, all in all, most countries are not expected to return to inflation target until 2025. Taken together, our projections are increasingly consistent with a soft landing scenario, bringing inflation down without a major downturn in activity. This is especially true in the US, where the unemployment rate is now expected to increase only mildly between now and 2025. Labor markets in advanced economies, while still tight, are softening without signs of a wage price spiral. Further, many countries are experiencing a sharp and welcome compression in the distribution of earnings, with wages growing faster at the bottom of the distribution. This could have to do with so-called amenity value of flexible and remote work schedules, reducing wage pressures for high earners. While some of the extreme risks have moderated since April, the balance remains tilted to the downside. First, the real estate crisis is deepening in China. Restoring confidence requires prompt action to restructure property developers, preserve financial stability, and address strained local public finances. The policy challenge is complex, but if well executed, it will enable China's economy to pivot away from a real estate credit-driven model of growth. Second, commodity prices could become more volatile with increasing climate and geopolitical shocks. This would represent a serious risk to the disinflation strategy. Between June and September, oil prices have increased by about 27% on the back of extended supply cuts from OPEC Plus countries, before falling back more recently by about 8%. Food prices remain elevated and could be disrupted further by an escalation of the war in Ukraine. Geoeconomic fragmentation has also led to a sharp increase in the dispersion in commodity prices across regions, including critical minerals. This could pose serious macroeconomic risks going forward, including to the climate transition. Third, inflation remains uncomfortably high. Near-term inflation expectations have risen markedly above target. Bringing these expectations back down is critical to winning the battle against inflation.
During the Africa Special Issue Press Briefing, IMF Director of the African Department, Abebe Amiro Selassie, said rising private investment and consumption are expected to lead growth in 2024 for more than three-quarters of the region's economies.
Still, inflation remains too high in many countries, adding to the cost of living challenges facing the most vulnerable. More than 158 million people on the continent, 13% of the population, are acutely food insecure.
Indeed, it's too far early to celebrate. Why? Because daunting challenges remain. Of course, some countries will do better than others, but too many African countries are expected to continue struggling to generate sustainable, inclusive, and job-rich growth that is needed to recover lost ground or to keep pace with continent's growing population. The continent's future resilience and longer-term prosperity depends on often difficult policy reforms. Moreover, while public debt levels are declining, they remain too high, around 65% of GDP in 2023. Debt service obligations have ballooned for both low and middle-income countries in Africa. Meeting these obligations crowds out critical spending on health, infrastructure, and education.
Education, particularly for girls, is vital, as the continent is home to the world's youngest and fastest growing population, who will soon join the global workforce. But to provide job entrants with new opportunities, there needs to be accelerated diversification. A pivot is needed from government-led growth to private sector innovation and investment in digitalization, widened access to the internet, and green technologies. In this context of continued shocks and disasters, Africa's policymakers need to prioritize efforts to boost resilience by ensuring macroeconomic stability and accelerating structural reforms to foster stronger, more inclusive growth.
The IMF is also stepping up. Between 2020 and today, the fund has provided about $80 billion through programs, emergency financing, and SDR allocation. 6 countries have also had arrangements approved under the newly launched Resilience and Sustainability Facility, including most recently for Morocco. With its young and vibrant population, the African continent has huge potential. Now it's the time for Africa and the international community to come together and help the continent make greater progress in its pursuit of stronger growth and resilience. Thank you very much.
Thanks for staying tuned. In our previous episode, we started a conversation on how Nigerians are hopeful that the new management of the Central Bank of Nigeria, under the leadership of the governor, Dr. Olayemi Cardoso, will come up with policies that will positively turn Nigeria's economy around for the better. Speaking on critical issues in the financial space and the economy at large, here's the Director, Chief Executive Officer, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, CPPE, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Talking about the macroeconomic situation of the country, let's talk about inflation, which is one of the things that the monetary policy tweak, once in a while to adjust things. But the inflation rate has persistently risen over the last, I think, 5 consecutive months. And the interest rate is already high. What would you advise the monetary authority to do in this regard?
You see, my view is that the monetary authorities have practically exhausted the strength of their instruments as far as curbing inflation is concerned. You have CRR, cash reserve ratio, at 32.5%. It's one of the highest anywhere in the world. You have NPR at 18.75%. That's also one of the highest anywhere in the world. So, what more can they do? So, for me, there is very little room for monetary policy instruments to tame inflation, unless you want to paralyze and strangulate even the banking sector itself. We just talk about the challenges of high interest rates and the way that is hurting the economy. So for me, I think the bigger issues that need to be addressed are more on the fiscal side, a bit also on the monetary side, particularly from the point of view of the ways and means finances. Because according to the CBN governor, again when he was interacting with the Senate, said 50% of the inflation was caused by the liquidity generated from the ways and means finances. That the impact of that on money supply. So that is a major area that he needs to manage. Politically, it may be very challenging because when the government has challenges with funds, it's very easy to run to the central bank to bridge financing gap. So he must be prepared to face some challenges in that area. But we need to deal with that so that we don't see an explosion of money supply again. Remember, a few weeks to the end of the previous administration, the National Assembly had to be struggling with 23 trillion in ways and means, which has been spent, which was not even appropriated for. It was one of the biggest breaches of the Constitution and one of the biggest violations of the CBN Act. That kind of thing, we should not allow it to happen. The fiscal side has a lot to do with dealing with the supply side of the economy. Because when the cost of production is going up, diesel is now over 1,000 naira per litre. There is no steady supply of electricity. Exchange rate is depreciating. Why will costs not go up? Why will there not be inflation? So a lot is also coming from the cost side, the supply side of the economy, which the fiscal side also need to work a lot more on. And the government can also tweak some of our trade policies, especially our import duties and tariffs, to see how they can bring down some of these costs. Because we may not have immediate control over exchange rates. We may not have immediate control over energy prices. But we have some control over some import tariff or some critical inputs for the economy. Government can tweak that to bring down the pressure on the supply side of the economy.
You've mentioned some of the reforms you would like to see happen in Nigeria's financial sector, but on account of the naira depreciation, the managed float forex regime, there are fears in some quarters that some banks may need to recapitalize. Is that something you would expect the new management of the CBN to look into?
Well, for the sake of the stability of the financial system and the banking system, recapitalization is inevitable. At the time when we had the last review of minimum capital requirements, that was 2004, if I'm not mistaken, minimum capitalization was 25 billion naira. At that time, 25 billion naira was equivalent of $133 million. Today, the same 25 billion is just about $30 million. You can see how the capital base has been eroded over time because of inflation. So, and unless we quickly recapitalize, many of the banks may not be able to, withstand or manage some of their exposure, because the capital base must be strong enough to match their exposure, to minimize any risk to the stability of the banking system. So it goes without saying, there is need to recapitalize because of the massive erosion of the capital base as a result of inflation. Although I'm aware that some banks on their own have significantly upscaled their capital base, but there are some others that have not done so. So the CBN needs to encourage them to quickly do so without disrupting the system. Because the kind of recapitalization we had during Soludo was a bit disruptive. Because many of the banks were stampeded. They were not given enough time. Some of them went under. Whereas if they had been given enough time, they would have been able to meet the requirement. So we should do it with minimum disruption to the financial system. I think it's something that is desirable.
All right, finally, the present administration has made efforts to attract foreign direct investment, foreign portfolio investment to balance things in the economy. What critical role should the Central Bank of Nigeria, as the highest monetary authority in the land, play in this in this regard of attracting foreign direct investment into the economy? What is their specific roles?
Now, when we talk about investment, I think we should put the two components of investment on the table. foreign investments and domestic investments, because the two are equally important. For the foreign investment, the CBN has a very critical role to play in ensuring liquidity in the foreign exchange market, because international flow of capital is about the ease with which capital can move in and out. And that is what liquidity is all about. So we need to create liquidity in the foreign exchange market through encouragement in getting more supplies. We need to get the support of multilateral agencies, so be it. But we need to inspire that confidence that when they bring in their funds will not get stuck. That is very, very important. So that is one major role that the CBN has to play as far as foreign investment is concerned, whether it is portfolio flows or FDI. And they must also be able to come in at a market rate that is transparent, and as much as possible that is also reflective of market realities. That is important. Then on the domestic front, CBN also has a role to play in the area of development finance. Again, I must caution here that I'm not advocating that the CBN should go to the extreme of what we had with the previous dispensation in terms of practically taking over a lot of fiscal responsibilities in terms of so many interventions. But as a developing economy, and given the evidence of market failure in the financial markets, there is need for CBN intervention to create a robust development finance window where investors in long-term projects, in infrastructure projects, in agriculture, in manufacturing, in mining, in real estate, can be able to access funds at a much cheaper rate, possibly single digits, and at a much longer tenure of 5, 10, even 15 years. I talk of market failure because you can't get that kind of funds in the conventional commercial banking system. And when we are talking about a market economy, whatever the market cannot deliver in terms of objectives, that is an evidence of market failure. And once that manifests, it is for development agencies, development institutions, or the government itself to intervene to ensure the achievement of such objectives. That is why in a market economy, there's always room for government intervention in areas where the market cannot deliver in terms of delivering a particular critical developmental objective. So we should not close the development finance window. We should leave it open, but it should be more professionally managed. It should be handled by the development finance institutions, not directly by the central bank, as we have seen in the past. And I think even the CBN governor alluded to that when he was interacting with the Senate during the screening.
Well, that seems like a good place to hang the discussion today.
Yeah.
Many thanks always for being willing to speak to us.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you.
That's all we have from the CBN this week. Be careful not to fall for any fraudulent recruitment portal or loan scheme advertisements purportedly from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Get your information from trusted sources always. Report unresolved banking issues to the CBN Consumer Protection Department using the email cpd@cbn.gov.ng. Attach relevant documents. Call the CBN Contact Center on the phone line +234 700 2255 226. Local call rates may apply. Write to us through the email address from the CBN at gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and X, formerly Twitter, for updates and to watch uploaded episodes of the program. We invite you to join us again next time. I am Willie Emisi Dada. Stay safe. Bye for now.